Thanks for joining me today. We're going to look at writing reports when you're using non-instructed advocacy as an approach. It's going to be split into two parts. First part, we're going to look at a general overview about tips and how to approach writing a report. And the second part, we're going to look at some examples of how to structure and how to present your information. I know, just sounds amazing. So let's get going. We're going to think, first of all, about what's the point of a report. So if I was to just get you to write down what you think, what's the purpose of writing a report when we use non-instructed advocacy? Because when we use instructed advocacy, we don't really write reports. We wouldn't dream, I think, of writing a report about somebody. In instructed advocacy, it's all about the person expressing what they want. And if anything, we help them to write a letter or a report. But when we use non-instructed advocacy and we are thinking about how do we capture, how do we present the information we found out, it always starts with the purpose, which is to capture the person and their views. The report is always person-centered and trying as much as we can to bring the person to life. This report is representing that individual and what they would say if they had the capacity to say that and express their views. Some of the areas of downfall I think that we can sometimes make as advocates is that we can spend time worrying and writing about things that just simply don't matter. And the things I've put on here are good examples of this. Eligibility. You don't need to write in the report if the person's eligible for care. By the time you're writing a report, I think that's understood. You've got your referral processes where you've checked eligibility. So there's absolutely no need to write on that front page that the person lacks capacity and doesn't have a consultee. It's just a waste of time. You also don't need to write what you did. You certainly don't need to write about the records you access, and you don't need to write about people you've spoken to. Now, for people who've been IMCAs for a long time, you're probably horrified. You might have spat out your tea at this point. But let me explain. Those things are absolutely throwbacks to the original template that the Department of Health produced way back, nearly 20 years ago. And the reason they produced that template was really to ensure consistency, because this was a new service, a new type of role. So the DH wanted consistency, and it made perfect sense to introduce consistency through report writing. Now, we don't need it. All of that information is in your case notes, what you did, records you've accessed. For me, when I pick up an IMCA report and it's 5 pages long, I sometimes don't get to the real information until page 3, because the first 2 pages is just a list of dates, list of who the person spoke to, commentary about eligibility. And honestly, I'm like, I don't need all that. I simply don't need it. And the downside of that is it can distract, and hear me now, it can distract from the point that you're trying to make. By putting in all this noise, what we're doing is we're making the report about me. We're making the report about you. We're making the report about the advocate and what the advocate did. We don't want that. We want the report to be about the person. And as I say, all of that information is in your case notes. Some of the kind of lower quality IMCA reports that I've seen have been a copy and paste job from case notes. For me, I think that's a complete not a waste of time. It lacks the analysis, it lacks the interpretation. You are not writing the story of what you've done. You are writing the story of the person and what you found out. And it's a really significant shift. So that's kind of where we're going with this guidance. So what do we write about? So you're essentially putting down on paper what you've found out about the person. And you're doing that so that you can help the decision maker make that best interest decision, which includes the views. So the gold standard, of course, would be to say what those views are. And if you can find out from your partner what they want, that's what you're putting down. And it doesn't matter if the person wants to stay at home, but they can't. You are putting that down because that is their views. You're not making the decision. You're not trying to fix things. You are representing what's important to that individual. So you put that down, and where you can find that out, I think your report kind of writes itself, because you are simply representing the person and what they've told you that they want. If you can't find that out directly from the person because of capacity or communication, then what you want to do is you want to find out, well, what's important to them? How do they live their life? which relationships are important to them, how, are they early birds, are they night owls, are they extrovert, introvert, are they active, do they like quiet? What is it? What is it about this person that's important to them? How they want to live their life. And that's the bit that we're trying to find out as an advocate. We're trying to find out, what would they say? What decision would they make if they could make it? And that's inevitably going to involve you talking to people who know that person well, their carers, but also going to visit the person and observing them. The two main approaches in non-instructed advocacy, the person-centred approach and the watch and brief, will then kind of influence what the rest of the report looks like. If you're using the person-centred approach, I'd encourage you to think about, what is life like for the person? What are the most important things? And how do we make it better? And the answers to those questions almost become the structure of your report. If you're using the watch and brief, which is a really great approach, certainly for IMCAs, because you've got a specific decision and you're looking at the decision and you're applying it to the different domains of the person's life. How will this decision impact on their independence? How will it impact on choice? How will it impact on relationships? That then becomes the structure of your report. So that's one of the reasons why I don't believe in templates for report writing. I'll be totally honest. I think when you have a template, it's human nature, isn't it, to kind of fill the header. Somebody gives me a header, I feel compelled to write something in. And what that creates, I think, is more noise. You want autonomy when you're writing your reports. You know what you found out. You know what you want to say. So say it. And with that, I would encourage you to keep the structure very, very simple. Honestly, I wouldn't have any template, any headers. You've got your introduction, three sections. Introduction, where you are saying what the background is, and that's to give context to what you're about to say. Section 2 is what you found out. Now, when you're writing what you found out, I want you to get into the rhythm. If you make your point, you evidence it. You make your point and you evidence it. So my point might be, this person wants to live at home. Joan wants to live at home. How do I know that? She's told me. And then I'm going to put some direct quotes of what Joan said. I might find out that Joan's miserable at where she lives. I'm going to say that. Joan is miserable. How do I know that? She's told me. Her carers have told me. I observed it. We make our point, we evidence it. What we're not doing is saying, I went to see Joan, I explained my role. During this conversation, Joan told me she was miserable. It's the third sentence before we get to what Joan thinks. Don't hide it. Bring it to the front. Our starting point in that middle section of what we found is always make your point, make it clear, and then evidence it. And then the third thing I'd say about structure is, for the summary, make it useful, keep it useful. So you want to ask questions and you want to make points for consideration. So these are basically suggestions. Does the person need an assessment? Do they have a right to an assessment? Do they need support in understanding the decision further? So social stories or experience in visiting places. Whatever you think is helpful, that's what you put in the summary. This is also the place where you're going to be raising any issues around concerns, any violations or human rights concerns. And here, please avoid any temptation to quite lazily copy and paste sections of the Mental Capacity Act. It doesn't add anything to your reports, believe me. When you copy and paste something, it's really obvious you've copy and pasted it. Any reader will tell you that. And what happens when we see something that copies and pasted, we don't read it. So only use the sections of the Mental Capacity Act that add something to the report. Bring in the Mental Capacity Act, the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, the Care Act, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Any framework, bring it in thoughtfully and specifically, because that's what makes it useful. I'm going to finish there with the overview. And in our second part, we're going to look at a couple of examples of what reports could look like.